Welcome. You're tuned into Life is a Sacred Journey. Every week, we bring a new perspective to aging and caregiving. Here is your host, Michelle Pope.
All right, friends, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are in the virtual neighborhood of Life is a Sacred Journey. I'm getting organized this morning. I would love to just say to you, welcome and thank you again for all of you that have been supporting Life is a Sacred Journey. I don't even remember now when we started this a long time ago with our collaborative interns, and we've been doing it from a podcast to this platform here. So I just want to thank you. I want you to hit the share button, invite others to join you this morning on Life is a Sacred Journey. I think this is going to be an incredible conversation. I know it's going to be. Our friend, Dr. Robert Pearl, has rejoined us here this morning on Life is a Sacred Journey. As always, we have our candle lit for those that are experiencing mental health challenges, as well as for those who are experiencing loss in their family, grief, and for those that have gone on before us. So we light our candle there. Let me tell you a little bit about Dr. Robert Pearl as I bring him into the platform. Life is a Sacred Journey. And again, happy Friday. For 18 years, Robert Pearl served as the CEO of the Permanente Medical Group, Kaiser Permanente. He is also former president of the Mid-Atlantic Permanente Medical Group, and in those roles, he led 10,000 physicians, 38,000 staff, and was responsible for the nationally recognized medical care of 5 million Kaiser Permanente members on the West and East Coast. He is a clinical professor of plastic surgery at Stanford University School of Medicine and on the faculty, of the Stanford Graduate School of Business, where he teaches courses on healthcare strategy, technology, and leadership. Very important. Dr. Pearl is a board certified in plastic and reconstructive surgery, receiving his medical degree from Yale, and followed by a residency in plastic and reconstructive surgery at Stanford University. He's the author, and this is how I came into his life, of 3 books, Mistreated, Why We Think We're Getting Good Healthcare and Why We're Usually Wrong. My first read in 2017, a bestseller on the Washington Post list. Uncaring, How the Culture of Medicine Kills Doctors and Patients. Another phenomenal book that I'm just like every colleague that I have, I go, if you haven't read this book, you need to get it because it really helps you to think about the healthcare system and actually the manifestation of it in the lives of all people, and particularly those who are underserved. And then now the newest book, which we talked about not too long ago, was Chat GPT MD, How AI Empowered Patients and Doctors Care Can Take Back Control of American Medicine. And that just came out in April. I have my copy at home. I have been so busy, I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but it's on my to-do list. And all the profits from the sales of Dr. Pearl's books, another organization that I have a great deal of respect and love, Doctors Without Borders. These are amazing physicians that just go all over the world and care for people in places that many of us, even missionaries, are afraid to go. So I could go on. There's 2 pages here, but Dr. Pearl has become a friend of Life is a Sacred Journey, and I consider him not only a colleague in the care of the mind, body, and spirits of the people that we serve here at Alzheimer's Services of the East Bay, but just as a person who is a humanitarian and who is walking this space, this world, this universe that is very small, friends, and trying to make a valuable difference in an area that we talk a lot about, and that is wellness. And today, we promised that we would gather again and talk about this pandemic. I'm going to call it a pandemic around mental health. Mental health, I just came back, Dr. Pearl, and welcome again. It's always so good to see you. I just came back from a conference for the denomination where I practice my faith. And one of the big things that we talked about was how mental health for our pastors. These are, and how we're noticing that the lack of wellness mentally, and which affects their spiritual, which affects everything. It's really impacting their ability, and we're seeing a decrease in people wanting to become clergy or to work in faith-based communities. So I think this is the same that we see in the medical field, but now we see across the United States. And I know the Surgeon General just wrote a book about young people, and I really, that touches my heart deeply. We end Life is a Sacred Journey every week with the suicide hotline, because I have a godchild that took her life a couple of years ago due to online bullying. So help us to understand. We all know these terms: PTSD, anxiety, trigger response, depression. But when we put them all together in this jungle mumbo, how is this impacting our lives as we have continued to live within a pandemic state? Because I think we are still living with pandemic residual, but we're hurting.
Well, we absolutely are. And I think that we have to start by going back.
Okay.
Let's go back to 2020, which is really the start of the pandemic. So we're coming out of life that was, I'll say, reasonably good for people. The world was okay. I mean, a lot of people suffer, as you well know. You see them all the time in the work you do, both in your faith and inside your society that you work within.
Mhm.
But life was reasonably good.
Right.
And this pandemic comes, and this virus comes ashore. This coronavirus comes ashore, and we don't have any treatment for a lethal disease, and we have no sense of the size of the problem. And we retreat into our homes. Now, just start with that image and ask yourself, how is that going to feel? Massive fear every single day. You are afraid to see someone face to face. You're afraid and not able to see your loved ones. Thanksgiving's coming. Christmas is coming. What about your summer vacation? All the things that you looked forward to, that you really enjoy in your life. I mean, talk about a faith. You couldn't go to your church. You couldn't worship. I mean, just start by asking. Let's not look at it. We're not going to look at 21 and 22 until we look at 20 first.
Yeah.
We don't know. Can you go to the supermarket and buy food without getting this problem? How do you eat? How do you connect?
Mm-hmm.
So we would expect this would be a massive fear. I mean, the last time this really happened outside of war, the last time it really happened was 100 years ago, when there was the flu epidemic of 1918, 1919 sitting in play. When did it happen before that? Things like the plague, that killed hundreds of thousands and millions of people across Europe. We could have lost multiple million. So how do people respond to overwhelming fear? They start to get a little crazy.
Yeah.
That's what I think of as the second phase. Right? The second phase, basically, should we be swallowing bleach? Should we be, is it okay? Do you wash your hands? Do you not wash your hands? Do you, this whole craziness that now leads to polarization. Fear is going to lead to polarization. Now, I want to add a third piece on top of it, which is going to be discrimination. Now, why do I say that? Because in times of fear, we turn on people who are not like ourselves. Sometimes consciously, more often unconsciously. Yes. Now, what do we see? This divide is getting greater, right? Because now it's not just a divide between, I'm now in my house, you're in your house, but I'm going to start looking and saying, are you someone I'm going to fear even more? Not rationally,
Yeah.
Because you look different, you talk differently, you worship differently. It doesn't matter what the driver is. You couldn't imagine a more problematic mental health picture.
Mhm.
This is the first piece. I also would like to dive into the reality, as you say, for socioeconomically challenged communities. What did they face? They faced the reality that they couldn't stay home. They had, because their job, they
Yeah.
had to get on a bus, they had to go someplace. What did the data say? They were going to be dying twice as often as these people who got to stay home.
Yeah.
How does that feel to you when you know that, you're risking the parent of your child, you're risking the parent of your spouse, whatever it's going to be. I mean, sorry, the relationship with the spouse. So now you have an even bigger piece where not only do you feel that you're afraid, but now you are taking a burden that you feel is inappropriate because you're having to risk your life to protect something else while people you know are going to be home. And now you add another piece on top of it, which is now you need care. And you go to an emergency room and you don't, even though you're dying twice as often as others, you're not going to get the care, the diagnostic testing, because the kits are in short supply. Just think about the magnitude. I've layered level of pain upon pain upon pain. First I put a 10-pound weight on your back, then it's a 20, then it's a 30, at a 4. At some point, I'm going to break your back. Now we transfer that down to the kids. All right. Yeah. You're looking at you're an expert in this area. This is your background, your training, childhood development, adolescent development, early adult development. You're an expert in this area. These are crucial milestones. It's not like just growing.
Right.
This is something you've got to learn. How do
Yeah.
you learn? You learn by interaction. Right? Where do you interact? School.
Right.
Schools are closed. You're not going to interact there.
Right.
Where do you learn? Downtown, at community center, in your church. I mean, all the places that you've traditionally met people. So what is your only option? Your only option. You can't leave the house.
That's right.
Social media. And social media, we know. You mentioned the Surgeon General's report on it. Most recently, you saw this week that they're looking at putting a label on. This is as dangerous as smoking, right? And what do we know in social media? Social media is a source of anxiety for teenagers, for young kids. We're talking about kids 8, 10, 12 years of age. You look on this, and of course, it's all been altered.
Yeah.
And you say, look at me. My life is terrible. All these other lives are out there are great. You have nothing to do. You're bored. You find someone to bully. You find someone, you create a print of a classmate and you put her face on a nude body. I mean, you look at all of the ways we know middle school, even high school, vicious, because it's part of this development, but you've now given a powerful sword or a gun, call it what you want, not because kids are inherently bad. It's just part of this angst of adolescence. So what would you expect? Massive psychological problems.
Yep.
I will call it stilted growth. You want to call it PTSD, because you're right. The acute viruses, at least temporarily, we don't know what's going to happen long term,
right,
disappeared. But all the residual, all of the habits, all of the things we didn't learn, all the ways that we can be cruel and harm people, they still exist today. The divisions still exist today. I'm worried as you are that we're not going to catch up anytime soon. And there's a lot of evidence about what's called ACEs, adverse childhood events.
Yes.
Like an adverse childhood event, your chances of becoming sick, physically sick, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, not just by the way in your own life, but your kid, your next generation.
That's right. Yes.
We're going to have this problem. And as I say, the loss in time in school, what the education that didn't happen. And again, particularly in socioeconomically challenged homes. Why is that? Because the parents had to go to work.
That's
so
right.
rather than being there to support the child and fill in the gap, you couldn't be there because you were someplace else doing your job as opposed to someone else who was there. So I think this is going to grow significantly, and I'm not quite sure how we're going to solve it. I'll turn to you because you are an expert in this. What are your ideas? How do we establish community? How do we break down those barriers? How do we overcome the social media? I'll turn it back to you and ask you, what should we do next? Because you're an expert in this area.
I appreciate your saying that, Dr. Pearl. But you know, one of the things that I've been thinking about is the very thing that you just said. How do we engage in community? How do we rebuild what I think has been diminishing over the last 2 decades, which is community, which is neighborhood, which is doing things in a collective place together. I was just thinking about the 4th of July and living in Boston and how we would go to the Charles River to listen to the Pops. And there were people from Southie that at that time, you know, people from other parts of Boston, that we had some race issues. But in that moment, 4th of July, at the Charles River, listening to the Pops, everybody was one. And then the fireworks over the Charles River, and those sense of those kinds of things do not happen in our communities. Block parties. I remember growing up in every neighborhood where there was a block party, where churches were open. Not now churches are locked because they're afraid of vandalism and all of that. So they were open before. You could walk into a church, you can watch movies and see. People were always running and being able to access a sanctuary somewhere, not just a sanctuary for faith, but a sanctuary of fellowship and being with people. And we have gotten so far away from that that paradigm that I think that's where we lost bandwidth, because even when I grew up in a time, I didn't grow up poor by any means. My family worked very hard, and so we had almost everything that we needed and a little bit more. But that structure of family was also very tight, which I see in this day and age, that there isn't that level of respect that you teach and all of that. I don't see it. I don't see it. I think we got into the Nickelodeon, and I'm sorry, I'm doing this educationally, but the Nickelodeon era, where every sitcom that had children in it, the children were constantly being disrespectful to the parent, and that became the norm. It's like that you talk to your parent any old kind of way, and then they talk to you like you're a friend, and there's no, you know, it's just this, it's exploded, and we have imploded as a culture of people. And I want to tell you this, just last night in a meeting, we were in conflict about a particular issue, and that a person had raised up in a letter. And he used terminology in the letter that many people disagreed with. But as I read the letter and as I began to engage in this conversation, I said to them, you can't be angry about how he feels. The words that he chose were his words. Now, if there is some correction that needs to be made based on the policy stuff, that's what we can speak to. But you can't tell this man that he can't use these emotional words to describe how he feels. You want to dummy down his feelings to make it so that you can tell him that he is wrong. And so that is mind-boggling to me, but I realize it's become the norm for many, many people that, and you spoke to it, that you open your mouth and you say something, and instead of somebody going, I wonder, let me ponder that. That's not been my experience. Let me do some research on that. How does that make me feel? Versus, you are wrong, and basically just attacking. We can't even share ideas in a way that is loving and caring and being, I don't have to accept what anybody says, but they also have a right to say what they feel. And I think we've done that too. We victimize the victim. If you are a victim of anything in this society, we victimize you over and over again by asking you silly questions about, well, how did you feel about being raped? What? do you really want to hear that? I mean, or do you not already know? And what is that about? So I don't know the answer. I do believe, though, what you said is that children need, I have a granddaughter now that will be a year old next week, and spending Thursdays with her, I have seen what love does, where when there's no negative emotion in your language, even when I've said to her no, it's not in a way of demeaning her or robbing her of her autonomy or self-esteem. I just say, no, don't do that. And she pulls her hands away and frolics off. There's no tears, there's no any of that. So I do think there is a way that we need to go back to that way that we communicated. I think when I grew up, I have to say, that's how my parents communicated with me. They didn't have to, beat me or spank me. All they had to do was look at me and say, don't do that. And I was like, oh, cool. I see a difference in them. I don't know why. Maybe this is for safety. Maybe this is for this. Maybe it's for that. But I honored them enough, trusted them enough. There you go. Trusted them enough that what they said to me, I honored. And no, I wouldn't have jumped off a bridge if they told me to do that. But I also know they would never have asked me to do that. So there's the lack of safety, lack of trust. I think our young adults who did not get the opportunity to spend their last 2 years on a college campus and did it remotely, and even had remote graduations or drive-by graduations, have suffered mightily, because that's where you get your last bit of adult kind of, how do I live with people without my parents around kind of thing. And they didn't get it. And now they're being asked to work and have careers and take on school debt and take on an economy that's pretty awful for anyone that makes less than a certain amount of money. And so, yeah, Dr. Pearl, I think it needs community engagement. I think we need to have wonderful, town halls where we bring all levels of people together and create an equal space, where people can speak their minds and tell us how they feel without feeling that they're going to be victimized and attacked. And they're already getting that in the world. I believe in love. I believe that love and respect is something that you deserve as a human being, without me trampling on you and treating you with dishonor and disrespect. But I don't know how many of us exist in the world today. I know there's a few, but we're not together in one conglomerate. And I'm not talking cult. I'm talking about humanity stuff. Like, you and I have never physically met, but my respect for you is not just because you write books. It's not just because of your bio. It's because you are making a difference in the world. You're trying to help other people by donating the proceeds to Doctors Without Borders. You're writing books that help people to engage with their minds and to think differently and ask questions. So I don't have to meet you physically. I pray one day I do, but the honor and respect that I have for you is because you are a human being that shares this planet with me. And that's simple to me, but I know it's not. I know it sounds very Pollyanna to a lot of people because they've told me so.
So you're raising so many great points. Let me
Yeah.
double back in a couple of areas.
Yeah, please.
Let me go back to the very beginning to the book ChatGPT MD, and the audiobook, which I recorded actually myself, came out this week. It's already #1 on Amazon's new audio list, along with the book itself. That's #1 on the new books list. So I'm really pleased with that, and thank you for the help you've given me at promoting it. But let's go back into the question we started with, the focus of today's podcast around the psychological impacts of COVID. And I want to really focus this on your audience because every one of them has pain, but it's a different pain. So all we can do is, it's like trying to make a diagnosis. You can't necessarily say what everyone has because they have something that's a little bit different, but you can give them sort of a range of options, a palette of opportunities to look at. We haven't even talked about the fact of the deaths that happened, particularly amongst the older generation. As you know, growing up, your grandparents, very important people, and they died. Again, particularly in socioeconomic communities. Why is that? Because that is where the kind of isolation and protection that was available to some was not available. And these individuals who, might have been in their late 50s or 60s, had to go to work, became ill, and passed away. And that is a loss that we couldn't process and didn't process. So I want to emphasize that. So if there's a loss that's there, we probably skipped over it. As painful as it was, it may have been a funeral or a burial, but there was no gathering. You couldn't have an event because it was COVID.
Right.
So in this time of adolescence, I lost a grandparent in my adolescence. I still remember that loss massively. We haven't processed it. It's all the things the steps that exist that we haven't acknowledged, we haven't even seen. The second thing is the traditions.
Yes.
Families, you get together every Thanksgiving. But as soon as you miss two, you stop doing it. Your aunt and your uncle and your cousins don't come because it's just too much of a hassle to drive 2 hours. I mean, we did it for 20 years. Now it's a hassle because we didn't do it for it's a habit. You do a good activity, whether it's exercise or whether it's reading or whatever with your kids or whatever the activity is going to be. And after enough time, you start doing it automatically. You stop doing it. And by the way, it takes it's estimated somewhere between 21 and 30 days to build a good habit. It only takes a few days to break it. So that's the second thing. Where have we broken it inside the families? Not because anything's changed, but just because we're out of the habit. You raised some really powerful points. We used to go to church every Sunday, but now we stopped going. Or we used to go to the community center every Friday night, or whatever event, whatever you did before in 2019 that you've stopped doing in 2024. And now I know it's a little bit of a different topic, but I have to raise the things that I see around me.
Yes.
Inflation, the economic impact, you mentioned it earlier.
Yes.
If you have kids you want to feed, but now grocery prices are up 35 or 45%, and you're a parent, and you got to face your kids and say to them, I'm sorry, I can't give you the food you like because it's too expensive. Or, hopefully never happening, but we know it happens all the time. I have no food to give you. But whatever it's going to be, we have to understand that this sense of failure, even when it's completely out of your control, is psychologically devastating. So we have inflicted trauma after trauma after trauma
Yes.
And so I think when you mentioned earlier about this idea of whether the pandemic continues, that's a definition. A pandemic is a viral, but is the devastation ongoing? And the answer is yes. And as I said right now, the continuation, I think, for a lot of families, it's economic,
Yeah.
it's mourning, it's lack of tradition,
Yeah.
it's lack of events. And when all of that happens, you're out of practice. You know, your kids who would ride their bikes with their friends stopped riding it because they couldn't see their friends. And now they don't ride their bikes.
That's
So
right.
it's all the activities. And I'm not trying to make a judgment to tell people how to live their life. I'm just saying, look back at your life in 2019 and say, oh, how many things have you given up? And can you rebuild that? Can you replace that? Can you call your aunts and your uncles and say, we haven't gotten together in 3 years for Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter or whatever your holiday was. How about if we do it again this year? I'll host it in my house. I'll drive to your house. How do we build those traditions? Because I think that those are the supports of society that
Yes.
simply have been lost, not for any intent at all, but just because we're out of practice.
Yeah, and we're communal in nature. We're communal in nature that we wanna be with each other. We wanna rub elbows or be in a space with each other. And I thank you for reminding me. I was thinking about it this morning that I need to call my auntie and tell her I'm coming to Baltimore to visit her before this year is out, because it's that thing where we got comfortable with Zoom, we got comfortable with the phone, but it's never the same as being in that physical space with another person. Yeah, yeah. Before we run out of time, because we always do, you and I am very I've been reading a lot about generational trauma. And so I'd like you to speak on that, because that seems to be something that, I wonder sometimes in my life, and when I'm looking at my emotional intelligence or how I react to something, it's like, why did I react to that way? And I've maybe never had that experience that I'm reacting to, but it makes me feel something, and then I realize it may be because of the generations and the family stories or whatever I saw inflicted upon my ancestors and the people in my lineage. And but I worry about it, because I worry that, am I passing generational trauma? Have I already passed it on to my children, therefore my granddaughter? So can you talk a little bit about that before we wrap up for this episode?
Where there's so many different parts to it. And, you know, that's why I mentioned earlier these ACEs, these
Yeah.
childhood traumas that are there, the adverse ones that happen. The death of a grandparent or a parent or a child for that matter. But, you know, the COVID pandemic impacted far more older people than younger people. But that is something that impacts you forever.
Yeah.
The impact of skipping and missing growth opportunities and developmental opportunities that you noted. And if it happens to you when you're 12 and 15 and now you become 25 and now you have kids, you don't know how to teach them how to do those parts that are there. So you have those components. The impact of the economics are major, and that gets passed on in your psychology. If you didn't have the chance to do the educational pieces and now you're behind, I mean, it's really tough.
Yeah.
College, you know, you graduating high school is an achievement. Getting into a college,
Yeah.
being able to get through the rigors, particularly if you have to work at the same time that you're having to study, and you know there's no time, and all the problems that have always been there, they're now just magnified. And you're absolutely right, they are generational. and the traumas of the past that you've tried to get over. And again, as you know, I focus on the medical system, the health system,
Yes.
both in my writing and my clinical practice, but particularly for African American families that had concerns about the health care that they received in the past with good reason. Tuskegee, you can look at all the problems, high mortality rate in women giving birth, which clearly is going to be a reflection of that. Now it gets magnified by the COVID experience, where without any question, the care that was provided was not as good. And so now you're more reluctant. You're more reluctant to see a clinician. You're more reluctant to take care of your health. You have a problem, you don't get care. Now you have a crisis. So yes, I think what you're really saying is that even though a pandemic may only have lasted 3 or 4 years in its viral intensity, that it gets passed on, it gets continued, and then what you're talking about is passed on if we don't intervene. You may have inherited from your parents a proclivity, a tendency towards cardiovascular disease. And if you ignore that, you may have a heart attack. But if you say, look, I know that my father died early from a heart attack, so I am going to really watch what I eat. I'm going to make sure that I control my blood pressure, my blood fats, that I exercise. And not only that, I'm going to make sure that my kids do.
Yes.
Now you have the ability to overcome something you inherited from the last generation. It's not your fault that your father had a heart attack.
Right.
He inherited probably the tendency towards this problem. But that doesn't mean that you are powerless to do something about it. Now, I've used a very physical example of the issues. I think what you're also alluding to is the psychological. What did you inherit from your parents that you'd rather not pass on to your kids? And how did those things become worse in an environment of isolation? And what can you do to help your child?
Exactly.
The problem that we have is everyone is going into their little corner. You're not interacting with your kid because your kid's on the social media, on their phone, and you maybe are on your phone, so the interactions don't happen, the conversations don't happen, and you're powerless. You think things are good because everything is quiet.
Right.
You don't know what's actually happening. And so, I always look to your show to motivate the audience to do something. And I think the first step, again, as a clinician, is to make a diagnosis. What are the things that happened, the negative things, during this period of COVID? What are the things that have happened with the expansion of the isolation and the expansion of the social media and the other parts that are there?
Yes.
How do you as a parent feel about that in your life and in your kid's life? If you're really happy with everything, up to you. But I don't think many of your listeners will be, and I don't think any of us are, because we all had this trauma. We just survived. We didn't thrive.
Right.
And use your show as a stepping stone to begin a journey, to say, okay, here are the things that have deteriorated over the past 5 years. Not because of anything bad that I did, just because of the circumstances. Here is what I am going to do about it. Our family will now have 30 minutes with no phones at the table every night for dinner. We'll sit down on Sunday. We'll go to church together. We'll come home. We'll have a meal, and we will put our phones away. And we'll have a conversation about all the things that are happening and how we're feeling. Whatever it might be, I trust your audience to decide what to do. You and I can motivate them to say, you need to do something.
Yes. You guys, Dr. Pearl Pearls of Wisdom. There's a book actually, long time ago, came out. But the thing that he has just said is where Michelle Pope is in her life. Taking Thursdays and spending time with my granddaughter will be until the day I die now. Every Thursday, it'll probably end up me going and picking her up from school or taking her to school on Thursday. That's going to be her day for the rest of my life. And I won't let anything interfere with it. I don't schedule anything. I say no to stuff because of the commitment to do that, because it's important. So you have to be super vigilant, because other things will come up. And other things have come up where people to make money and all kinds of things that have come up on Thursdays. But I've made the commitment that her life is way more important, and my relationship with her is valuable. And if I miss 1 second of it, I'm going to be upset. That's one thing. My 25-year-old daughter, who I love and adore, we were growing apart because she wasn't living. She doesn't live in the home anymore, blah, blah, blah. So what I decided, I was like, okay, once a month, because she works on days that I don't work, I said, we're going to get together and we're going to have a meal together. And it just like Dr. Pearl said, we don't have our phones. And we just sit with each other. We talk about all kinds of topics. We agree to disagree. We look across the room at each other. We hold each other's hand. We usually end up going for a walk because we're outdoor people. And then there's sometimes moments of silence. And I want you to not understand that silence is good too, if you two are together. And I can hear her breathing. She can hear me breathing. But we have to make it a part of our lives. We have to schedule it as if our life depends on it, because it does, right? So what Dr. Pearl is saying is all of this stuff in life is going to happen. That's what life does. It ebbs and flows, and well, if it's not the COVID pandemic, well, it'll be something else. I'm old enough to now know that's just life, right? But it's how you manifest your mindfulness, your who do you want to be? I was just thinking about this. I have these deja vu moments before they happen. What do you want your heaven on earth to look like? And it starts inside of you. And it doesn't mean you won't cry. I lost my brother during the pandemic. It was the most devastating thing that could ever have happened to Michelle Pope. He was my bestest friend on this planet. And I wasn't able to go visit him in his illness because of COVID. I wasn't able to hold his hand to tell him how much I loved him and respected him and thank him for all the things he did for me as an older brother. But the good news is I had told him every time I talked to him before the pandemic was even in the history of our lives. So yes, I had a moment, but I got over that moment because I said, but Michelle, he knew because you told him all the time, and I did. So take those moments, because you never know. It could be a pandemic, it could be a car accident, it could be anything. And that person is not in your life physically or even able to call them, and you are feeling grief and you're feeling regret. You've got to be in those spaces with people, and you got to thank people and live in a place of gratitude. This is my mantra now to you, all of you. Be grateful for what you have. When you start being grateful for what you have, even the smallest little thing, you begin to look at things from a very different perspective. There's hundreds and thousands of books written on it. I swear to you. Go to the self-help area of any Barnes and Noble or Amazon. They're all going to come up. Gratitude. Like if the smallest thing, Dr. Pearl, I just had a cataract taken out of this eye. Whoa, they put the lens in and everything. And once the patch came off, I was like, whoa, this is amazing. 100 years ago, nobody could put a lens in, right? And I'm living in a time where I'm the bionic woman and I have a lens that's given me 20/20 vision. Wow, I am grateful. Right? So you find something that you can be grateful about and feel about, and then let it become your practice. You find that parking space right off the bat, Be grateful, smile and go, I'm grateful. Look at this. I got a parking space. Find laughter in your life. I laugh at myself all the time. I am crazy as a bedbug in my house by myself, and I laugh at myself all the time. I even write in my journal sometimes, if people only knew how crazy you really are. You know what I mean? But in jest and in a sense of humor, because we got to come off of our seriousness sometimes too. We say like habit. It's habitual to be intense and get rid of that. Get rid of that, and it takes time and it takes practice. So when Dr. Pearl brought that up, I wanted to share that with you, because when I tell you to pet a cat, pet a dog, and go hug a tree, I didn't make that up. There's a reason. It's because it makes you feel good. Yeah. So, and having friends like Dr. Robert Pearl in this world, writing books that I really advise you, if you are a part of a public health environment, because I know this podcast goes out to many of my colleagues throughout Alameda County, but throughout the world. But if you are in a public health environment, please do get the bestseller book, 2017, Uncaring: How the Culture of Medicine Kills Doctors and Patients. I really, when I had my cataract surgery, some of the pearls that Dr. Pearl dropped in his book, I kept thanking everybody that was taking care of me. From the woman that brought me the warm blanket, wow, that was amazing. To the person that pushed the gurney, to the person that strapped down my head, to the person that was giving me that twilight. I just kept saying, thank you so much. I really appreciate that you're doing this today. I have such great confidence in all of you. I was thanking them to nauseam. And the reason I did that, because there was 15 of us lined up to go in there to have that same doggone surgery, right? Think about if you had to do the same thing hour after hour after hour, and some people are nice and some people aren't nice. I wanted to be the person to break the mold in that day. And Dr. Pearl's book, Uncaring, not just from the system, but how we care for each other in the system. And so they were all so thankful. They kept laughing when my daughter came to get me. They said, is she always like this? And my daughter was like, yes. So they were happy and I was happy. So give a little bit of that. So Dr. Pearl's books, Uncaring: How the Culture of Medicine Kills Doctors and Patients, get it. The newest one, ChatGPT MD, is how AI empowered patients and doctors to take back control of American medicine. Really important. And again, all the profits. So you can buy 2 books, one for yourself, one to give away. All the profits go to Doctors Without Borders. And that is an incredible organization. Go online. I follow them online and they're doing some amazing things. I watched a surgery on a boat that was a life-giving surgery to a person. And it just made me want to, that's why I buy Dr. Pearl's books, because I get to contribute through him. Also, I want to ask you all to also check out Dr. Pearl's website, because he does have his own sort of ponderings and things that he reflects on in a newsletter, as well as you can hear his voice there. And just, check him out, because in this world, you want people, I call them sages. They're sages everywhere. And everybody has a little bit of the wisdom that we give to each other. And then this is my new thing to you, friends. I found this the other day. It says, grow happy. Don't think that happy happens because you drink happy. You got to grow happy. So you got to put a little water in, a little dirt, a little miracle grow, whatever that may be for you. But grow happy. Dr. Pearl, you are amazing. Thank you for joining us. What last words would you like to give the folks that joined you and I this morning?
So the website's robertpearlmd.com. So people can go to robertpearlmd.com. Lots of information there that they can do. My last words are, everyone who's listening and joining you, between now and the next podcast, Find one thing that you have lost over the past 5 years, whether it's a relationship with someone you love, whether it's a tradition you've stopped doing, whether it's just simply putting your phone down and having dinner at night, whether it's exercise, whether it's nutrition. I don't care what it is. I ask every listener, in return for having this wonderful podcast, find one thing, commit to it, and do it often enough that it becomes a habit. And I predict that after you've done that one thing, you'll find a second and a third, because it's going to feel so good. Thank you for having me on today. You're an amazing host.
You're an amazing colleague and friend and a human. I'm so happy that we're living this time of humanity together. Friends, you know how we end this. If you're out there and you're feeling sad, you're having anxiety, you're feeling depressed, and you think that there is no other option, that you have no other option but to take your life, I'm here to tell you that's a fleeting moment. It will pass, but you need help. So please get a phone, text, call 988. They made it easy for you. There are trained and wonderful human beings on the other end that will take time to talk with you, hook you up with resources. And I'm here to tell you, those of us that look the strongest know exactly how you feel. I've been there in my life where I thought, wow, you know, the people will be better off without me. The world will be better off without me. And then somebody said to me, no, Michelle, the best is yet to come. And day by day, second by second, minute by minute, year by year, Michelle Pope got whole. And so I'm not telling you this because I'm just pulling it out of the sky. I'm telling you because I've lived through it. So 988, dial it, text it, and give somebody a chance to tell you you matter. And all of us at Life is a Sacred Journey, Dr. Pearl writes about it. We care. We care. The world would be different if you were gone. So don't leave us. Get some help. 988. All right, friends. It's a wonderful weekend. I hear there's going to be heat across the whatever. Take care of yourselves in the heat. You know, I hear closing your blinds and darkening it so that sunlight doesn't come in, helps the air to stay cool. Fans are really good if you're on a fixed income, because I know air conditioning can be expensive. Drink a lot of water. Put your feet in some cold water. That's what I like to do. Whatever you need to do, but stay healthy, stay cool, and have fun and grow happy. All right. Peace out, friends. Have a wonderful weekend. Dr. Pearl, you are amazing, amazing. And we just are so grateful that you take time to come to Life is a Sacred Journey. We'll do it again soon.